We're learning the second Sikha on Parshas Re'eh in Chelek Chavtes on page 79. The shir today is being learned to Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. The pasuk in this week's parsha says, "Leisuchal lechol b'sharecha." You cannot eat in your gates, in your cities. Meiser de gancha v'tiroshcha v'yitzarecha. The mice is separated from your grain, your wine, or your oil. And also a carbon, a b'chair, and trumas yedecha, which refers to bekurim. Rashi of the Verta leisuchal. Rashi quotes the two words of the pasuk where it says leisuchal, you cannot. And after he explains ba kosov litin leises ala dovar, that the Torah is coming to say that there's a leises that one may not allow to do this. Which will be addressed later in the Sikha in Sifei, is Enocham Almaitik Diverta Leisuchal. He quotes again from the pasuk the two words Leisuchal, on his Mefarish and explains Rabbi Shua ben Karcha Eimer. Rabbi Shua ben Karcha said, Yochelata, you are able to eat these things in your cities, Aval en Charashoy, but you are not allowed. Und danach bringt a dugma dazu, and then Rashi brings another example where we find this, Kayetzebai, similar, where the expression of the pasuk is that you are unable, but it means that you're not allowed. Vesayevusi lo yachlu lo hirisham yichoylamayu el she'enu nashayim chulu k'lekaman siv beis. As we'll see this more specifically in the next sif. Davon verstehen, the question on this Rashi here is, that minyan as leisuchol kan meinen ein charashai. This translation, that leisuchal doesn't just mean that you're unable, but you're unable because you're not allowed. It's already found earlier in Chumash, in Sefer Shmois, state, the people cannot ascend the mountain on the Har Sinai, because you have already warned us to limit the mountain and not to go up. Rashi is if dem mefarish, and Rashi himself already explains this. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I don't have to warn Yidden about this. They're already warned from before. They cannot ascend the mountain because they have no permission. They're not allowed. Al derech zeh, similar is Rashi mefarish dem pasuk. Rashi also explains another pasuk where it says leisuchal lirois es panai. Hashem says, you cannot see my face. I do not give you the permission. In addition to the fact, this expression of that you're unable, and it means that it's not allowed, we find in Psukim here later, there are a number of loisases that are said in this with this language. Weiter in unser Sedre, you have it here in this week's Parsha Re'eh. You cannot, which means you may not, shech the carbon Pesach outside of the Beis Hamikdash. In Parsha Shoftim, you cannot, which means may not, appoint a guy as a king. In Parsha Seitze, where it says you may not or cannot have a firstborn, someone that wasn't born first. And you cannot ignore a lost object. A person may not send away his wife, in the case it's speaking about there. A person may not again marry the wife he divorced. So these are many expressions where the Torah uses the term la yuchal, that he is unable, but it means that he may not. Is tamua benidden didan. If so, it's difficult to understand in our case. But was ist unser Pasuk anders von die alle andere Erte? What is different in our pasuk from all these other places mentioned? Was darf Rashi bringen den Maimer von Rabbi Shua ben Karcha? Here Rashi has to quote the statement of Rabbi Shua ben Karcha that Yochalata, that you are able, aval en charashoy, but you're not allowed. Kiilo as der pirish en charashoy is a chiddush. Sounds like that this interpretation that it means that you're not allowed is a novelty. When we find this in a number of places in Torah and even earlier on. Furthermore, the Raya, as the Lashon Leisuchal can get werden. Ein Charashoy, the proof that Rashi brings that Leisuchal could be translated as that you are not allowed, bringt Rashi nit von die alle Erte in Chumash. Rashi does not quote from all these places in Chumash, nor was onkommen zu a pasuk von Navi. The only source and proof he finds is from a pasuk in Navi. Why is that? The Tmi is noch größer. The question of this goes even further. Kemat demselben Indien wie in unser Pirish Rashi is Rashi mefarish of die Werte leuchal oid lotzis v'lovei. Almost identical to what Rashi says here. Rashi explains further in the beginning of Parshas Vayelech, where it says that Moshe Rabbeinu says, I cannot leave or come. In Parshas Vayelech. So Rashi says, Yochel shetoshash kaychei chulu. I would think that he became too weak. So that's not the case though. So ma'olei uchal. Eini rashoy shenitla mimeni yereshus v'nitna liyeshua. I'm unable means that I'm not allowed, because the permission was taken from me and granted to Yeshua. So hat Rashi da gekent bringen a dugme von dem pasuk in Chumash. So Rashi brings an example for this from a pasuk here in Chumash, where Rashi allein is medayek u'mechiach dem teichen as yachalata v'en charashoy, where Rashi himself proves and explains that it doesn't mean that he's unable, but it means that he's not allowed. Onita dugme von Navi, and not an example from a pasuk in Navi. Additionally, we need to understand here in this Rashi. Aleph, darkte schon Rashi zu sagen gleich dem Pirish vom Wort oder der Pasuk, belit zu sagen die Shaila und Kushische Beteva. Rashi usually says his pshat in the Pasuk without first explaining what his question or quandary is regarding the word in the Pasuk. Hat euch benitten die dann gedarf sagen bekitzer loisuchal en charashai. So Rashi should have just translated concisely and said that loisuchal here means that you are not allowed. Avapi, as this is the lashon for Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. This is the language that Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says in Sifri. Zabenit in Yonif from Pirish Rashi ala Teire zu meitig sein mein Mori Chazal b'diik l'shayne. Rashi does not quote statements that says in Chazal precisely. Kimedu bekam b'pamim, as was explained and proven many times. Beis, another diak here is dem diak hayudua, the question well known that the Rebbe always asks. Why is Rashi here quote this interpretation in the name of the one that said it, Rabbi Shua ben Karcha? Nidvi beruba, the ruba from Perushi Rashi, not like the overwhelming majority of Rashi, where he doesn't mention the name of the one that said this statement. It was explained already a number of times as Rashi tutos nor nafal, when in dem Shem balamayme gitzu atoisvis avana in sein Pirish. If the name that he quotes is adding a certain understanding in the pshat that he says. Now, weiter in the dugme is Rashi meidech levayr. Now, if you look at the example that Rashi quotes from Navi as a source that the term of loisuchal could mean that you're not allowed, so Rashi explains another example in this at length. Kayetze by a similar pasuk we see, it says Vasayevusi Yoshve Yerushalayim. The Yevusi that were settled and living in Yerushalayim, lo yachlu b'nei Yehuda lo hirisham, they could not expel them from Yerushalayim. So Rashi explains, what does that pasuk mean when it says lo yachlu, they were unable? Yechaylim ayu, they were able. Elo she'enan rashayin, however, they were not allowed. L'fishakaras lam Avram bris, because Avram made a covenant with the Yevusim, and that's kashalokach me'maras hamachpela. When Avram Avinu bought the plot maras hamachpela to bury his wife Sarah, he then made a covenant with them that he will not expel them. Now, the ones that were occupying Yerushalayim at that time, they were really not Yevusim, they were Chitim, which are the ones that were there at Maras HaMachpelah and sold it to Avram. El al Shema Ir, Sheshma Yevus, they had this name of Yevusim because of the name of the city that was Yevus. Kach mefurish bepikar de Rabbi Loza. This is the way it's explained in Pikar de Rabbi Loza, that there was this covenant between Avram and the Chittim, which were now called Yevusim. This is also the meaning of the pasuk in Shmuel, where it says that ki mesircha ha'ivrim va'apsachim va'apischim tzlamim shekosva aleim es hashvua. That when David conquered Yerushalayim, he removed all different kinds of statues that had on it written this oath between Avram and the Chittim. He had them all removed, and then he conquered Yerushalayim. Now the makkah from der dugma, the source of this example that Rashi brings, is Mamare shel Rabbi Shua ben Karcha in Sifri. It's the statement of Rabbi Shua ben Karcha as he says it in the Sifri. Aber dort steht bekitzer. There it's more concise. Kayetze bayata aimer v'sayevusi yeshve Yerushalayim lo yachlu yelahirisham yechayim ayu avaleinam rashayim. They were able to expel them, but they were not allowed. Doesn't add any more details. Now, es ist move on the time for was Rashi bagnugen sich mit dem Kitzer. It's understood why Rashi cannot just write it in this short point, like in the Sifri. But Rashi muzdach mevai sein dem mechomish lemikra favos einam rashaim so einam Yerushalayim. Rashi has to explain his proof, his example. Why is it that they were not allowed to conquer Yerushalayim? Und der Pfarrer sein meisif levaya. So Rashi has to add and explain as Avram at Kairis bris given as mevet nit einnemen ir ayevusi, that there was a covenant made with them that they will not conquer the city of the Yevusi. Therefore, the question though here is on this example that Rashi brings. Gimel, and this is a third question, continuing from the questions that the Rebbe began in Sif Aleph. Favas lernt Rashi, as the Shvu is given, keshelokach Avram mehem ma'aras hamachpelah. Why does Rashi here say that this oath that there was, that Avram made with Yevusim, was at the time when he bought Ma'aras HaMachpelah? Was das vet klal nit in Chumash? This is a covenant that's not mentioned in the Psukim and Chumash at all, nor blois in Teirish Baal Peh and Pirkei Rabbi Elazar. It's something that says in Pirkei Rabbi Elazar, as Rashi quotes, B'shas megefin befeirish in Chumash a krisis bris zwischen Avram and Avimelech. There's another place where we find a clear covenant between Avram and Avimelech, and Rashi could have said that that's what we're talking about here. At Rashi, Dafke, mitzat pshutishu mikra, gedarft lernen, as das is given, die Schwur, auf nit einnehmen ihrer Yevusi, weil die Yevusim haben gestammt von Avimelech. So Rashi should have said that these Yevusim occupying Yerushalayim at that time, which were descendants of Avimelech, is the reason why the Yidden were unable to conquer the city, because they were not allowed. The Tmiyah is nachgresa, the question is even greater. Rashi and Nevi'im zoktake as lehoyer hashoyim ach misashvur shenishba Avram le'Avimelech. So Rashi clearly says that it was the oath that was made between Avram and Avimelech, and that's why they could not conquer the city. So why does here Rashi quote what it says in Pirkei Rabbi Elazar, which is not Pshuta Shel Mikra, it's never mentioned in Chumash, this covenant? Dale, the fourth question here is L'maynav kemine b'pshuta shel mikra di Yisafah from Rashi. What relevance is there to understanding the pasuk here? What Rashi adds, if in Lashon HaSifri, more than what the Sifri says, we see in Perusha at the conclusion of his explanation that v'hu shenemar kiyim esircha tzlamim shekosva aleim es hashvua. This is the explanation of the pasuk in Shmuel, where it says that that David HaMelech had them remove the statues that had this shvua written on it. So Zachnitten Yanish Rashi zum Mefarish sein mit Pirusha of Chumash Psukim and Navi. Rashi and Chumash, his point is not to explain the Psukim that there are in Psukim and Navi, the Psukim and Navi about this. Hey, the fifth question here is Rashi says Kach Mefurish b'Pirkei Rabbi Elazar. This is the way it's explained in Pirkei Rabbi Elazar. L'may nafgemina al derech hanal shayla beis. What relevance is there for us to know exactly where is the source of this statement that Rashi brings here from Chazal? Similar to the question regarding the name, that Rashi does not usually say the name of the one that says this statement. Here Rashi brings us the source where this is. Why? Rashi muss madgish sein, as der Inyan is genommen geworden von Chazal. Even if it's necessary for Rashi to let us know that he took this from Chazal, warum mikra gufe wird nicht amant as ashvur, because in the Psukim there is no such oath. Hat Rashi can sagen, kedarke bekam mekaimes, v'Rabbi seinu amru, v'chayetze b'zeh. So Rashi should have just said, as he usually does, that our sages taught us, or anything similar. Rashi is nitragel to ongem with the makar from sein pirish b'diuk. Rashi, it's not common that he should give us the exact source of his pshat in the pasuk. V'mizet in dem pirish Rashi atzma, as you see in this very Rashi itself. Rashi sagt nicht, as my morish Rabbi Shua ben Karcha is genommen geworden von Sifri. He doesn't tell us that this statement of Rabbi Shua ben Karcha comes from the Sifri. So therefore the question over here is, why does Rashi, when he brings this example from the Yevusi and the story that happened there, the way Rashi quotes it doesn't seem to fit with the Pashto Pshat that there is in the Pasuk, and Rashi adds details even more than what it says in the Sifri. And the Rebbe will also explain what's the Pshat over here in this Inyan of Leisuchal. Why does Rashi have to clarify that the meaning of unable in this case means because you're not allowed? This is not a chiddush. We find this in many places. So we could explain all of this as follows. Al derech hapshat, in learning and understanding the pasuk simply, is mistavet zu sagen, it's logical to say, as dort, wo the Torah sagt an, oif an isser beloshen leisuchal, that in those places where the Torah tells us about a prohibition using this term of that you are unable, yes, in these cases, the term leisuchal means that you are not allowed. The Torah is using this expression because we're not negating the simple pshat that you are unable. That you cannot do this. Das heißt, what this means is, es ist nicht der Pshat, als durch dem, was die Torah assetem zu tun, die Sach, wird bei ihm weggenommen die Möglichkeit, das zu tun. That maybe we would think to say that the point here, why it says that you are unable, is because by the very fact that the Torah says that this is not allowed, so by this prohibition, the Torah just took away your possibility to do this. Because it's, according to Torah, it's you're unable, it's not allowed. That's not the pshat. If that would be the point there, is this nit andish von alle Isuri Torah. So this is no different from all other prohibitions in the Torah. Und der Fund was not gezählte Erte. So the fact that only in a number of places the Torah uses this expression of leisuchal, that you are unable or similar, is muvanis understood as the efsharis to ton de misur is nit mitzadem tzivui nor mitzadem ander sibah. That over here, the fact that you are unable to do this, which is prohibited, is not only as a result of the command, but there is also another reason for this. And that's why only in these places does the Torah use this expression of leisuchal, that you are unable. Und das kann sein auf kama ifanem. And this, that there is another reason why you are unable, could be in one of a few ways. Oladugma, as the Rabbi will explain here, the following three possibilities. Aleph, number one, as a zazayin, was nachdem the Torah aset die Zach, this is such a matter that after the Torah says that it's prohibited, kenne die Zach nicht öftan. It's impossible to accomplish this. Not only because it's not allowed, but once it becomes prohibited, it's impossible to do. Ukemai, and an example for this would be, Pasuk mentioned before, la yuchal levaker es ben ha'uva geimer. You can't take a son of a wife that you love more and appoint him that he should be the firstborn. Even if the father would love to do so, and that this son should be the firstborn, he will not become the firstborn. It doesn't change. So it's impossible. And another example, that one may not send away his wife in that case, where the Pasuk speaks about this. And even if he does divorce her and send her away, he must remarry her, so it doesn't accomplish anything. So here you see that after the Torah gives the Isser, you cannot accomplish what you would want, even if you would try to do it. And therefore here the Torah uses the term that you are unable. Beis, another category in this is, Azach was nit tole beretzaynei. When it comes to matters that are not up to the person, it's not his choice. When the Pasuk says that Hashem says, you cannot see me, cannot see my face, because a human being cannot see me and live. So that's something which is not in the person's hand. It's impossible. Or, you cannot appoint a guy as a king. That's also something that's not in your hands. Why? The Pasuk continues and says, who a king is, that when he will sit on his throne, he will write a second Sefer Torah, and he'll read from this Torah, and to keep this Torah. Was das alles ist unmöglich bei ein Ishnachri This is all something which is not your choice. It's not in your hands to do this, to have a guy be appointed to be a king. He will not be able to learn the Torah. Another example, das was steht by Moshe. When it says that Moshe says, I can't leave and come, permission was taken from me and granted to Yeshua, so it's not anymore in his hands to go and come. The permission was already taken away and given to Yeshua. So the possibility was taken away from him. So therefore, this is another category where something is not in the person's hands at all. It's not his choice. And this is why Rashi would not quote from this case of Moshe as a source for what Rashi is speaking about here, because it's a case where it's not in his hands after the permission was taken away. Gimel, another category is b'shas b'shem frier angesagt geworden nitzitan azach. If it was already something that was commanded before, that this action shouldn't be done, pas danach den lashon leisuchal. Then it's appropriate afterwards to say that you are unable to do this. As meken dizach nitam. Since you already know that it's forbidden, so now the pasuk says you are unable. Ukemai, and an example for this is la yuchal la'am lalis al har Sinai ki ato hayedaisi banu lema hagbal geimer. The pasuk is saying that you are unable, the people are unable to go up to the mountain because you have already warned us from before. Kilash and Rashi as Yidden zeneshen evdem musrim vayim, that the Yidden are already warned about this earlier. Or another example is suchal ezbayach as a pasach bachat sharecha geimer. You can't shech the carbon pesach in any of your gates. Was neisuf lezeh as a krav a pesach is nit toli nor beritzene nor reichen dem kain amaktiv. Bringing the carbon pesach in whatever location you desire is not only in the person's hands. The kain is the one that is shechting the carbon, so it's really up to him. Kisug hasheni anal, like the second category, where it's things that are not in your choice. Is dem isret so maktiv zan a carbon bechutz is schon gestanden frier. So here, this not to bring a carbon outside the Beis Hamikdash was already mentioned earlier. Shama taviu geimer elisechem v'zivchechem geimer yishama locha pentalo elisecha b'chol makim, that your carbon should be brought only there in the Beis Hamikdash. Do not bring it in any other place. So this is an isra that was mentioned before. Another example is suchal salim. You may not ignore a lost object. It says already earlier, do not see this lost object and ignore it. Nachdem is the Torah Messiahim, and therefore the Torah could conclude, after we know that it's not allowed, that you're unable to do this. These are the three explanations, three categories when the Torah uses the expression of you are unable, even though it really means that you are not allowed. So now coming back to our pasuk. This explains what's the novelty in our pasuk where the Torah uses this expression that you are unable. You're unable to eat from the meiser and the kotchen outside of Yerushalayim. In our case, is noch nicht gestanen. It has never been said before, as b'sha'arecha, that in your gates, tarminet essen meiser goyme, b'chayres b'karcha goyme, b'chol nederecha goyme, b'trumas yedecha, that you may not eat from the meiser or kotchen outside Yerushalayim. Es ist nur gestanden dem Lav from Pentale or Lesecha b'chol makom geimer. Yes, there is a lav not to sacrifice the carbon outside Yerushalayim. So kommt das, as the Isra Achille wird melchatchille angesagt mit dem Lashon leisuchal. So this is a case where the Torah for the first time is writing the Isra, the prohibition, with this expression of that you're unable. On the far stellt sich Rashi da up und is mechadish, and therefore Rashi stops on this and has to tell us that yachalata aval ein charashai. That here as well we must say that it means that you're able but you're not allowed. As eichan azafal pas dem loshen loisuchal. And even in such a case, it's appropriate to use this term that you are unable. Vibalt as the isra atayra gufe is shaylol the meglachait to tondizach. Here we see that yes, the term of you being unable is because of the fact that the Torah takes away your possibility by saying that it's prohibited. That's what Rashi is being mechadish in this case. Das is aber nit abir maspik. This explanation, though, is insufficient. While for the following reasons. Aleph, number one, the fizeh is doch ein araye doimel nidden. The proof that Rashi brings for this is not similar to what our pasuk is talking about. In the dogma from Vesayevusi, and that the Yidden could not conquer the city of Yerushalayim that belonged to the Yevusim. And it means that they were able, but they were not allowed, is that Issa nit angesagt geworden mit den Lashon la yachlu von dem pasuk. The fact that it was prohibited is not being said here for the first time in this pasuk with this language that you can't. Nor kommt mit zadem friedige Schwur. The Issa here is a result of an oath that was already expressed and taken before. So therefore, we're looking for an example where the Torah introduces an Isra for the very first time with the term of that you're unable. Pays another point. Afal piyaz alav. Mufurish. Eisen esemais of v'chule b'chutz. Gefind minit frier in the Torah. Yes, it's true that we do not find alav where the Torah says that you shall not eat outside Yerushalayim. We don't find this earlier in the Torah. Veist m'shein aber dem Isser von afriedig and sivui b'loshen eser. However, we do know that this is not allowed based on what the Torah says in the positive, in a mitzvah sesa. That va'vesim shama and va'achaltem shamgem. You have to bring it there to Yerushalayim and eat the maisa there. Azay is the Leisuchal da is nit anders lechaire von the andere Erte in Teire. So if so, the term of Leisuchal, that you're unable, here in this case is not different than other places in Teire, wo der Leisuchal steht bescheiches zu an Isser, was ist schon angesagt geworden früher. Where the term, where it says that you are unable, is being used in connection to something which is prohibited that was already mentioned earlier. Here as well, the Esse already says before. Gimel, a third point here is, Vipalt, Leisuchal is sof. Mas bayed lav, if we'll say that what Rashi is telling us here is that the term Leisuchal that's being used here is because right now, the Torah for the first time is saying that it's prohibited, and that's the reason why you're unable. So this can be really used by every lav. Is favas nutzen Torah loshen Leisuchal dafke by dem lav. So why is it that the Torah does use this term of Leisuchal that you're unable only here regarding this lav? So there has to be another explanation for why Rashi is saying here what he's saying, that Leisuchal here means that you are able, but you are not allowed. So to understand this, let's go back to the first Rashi here on this pasuk as quoted in Kitzur in the beginning of the Sikha. Leisuchal means ba kosov litin loisesa ala dover. The Torah here is coming to give us another loisesa regarding this matter. Dem loshen litin loisesa chulu sagt Rashi in noch drei Erte beparsha seinu besmiches unser pasuk. Rashi says it in other three psukim, right here near our pasuk as well. Aleph, Hisham alocha pentaler lesecha b'chamokim ashetira, as quoted before, do not bring your carbon in any other place outside the Beis HaMikdash. Says Rashi, litein loisesa ala dover. It's coming to add a loisesa on this matter. Beis, Hisham alocha pentazer v'salevi gomer. Be careful not to leave the Levi alone. You have to support him amongst with all poor people. Litein loisesa ala dover. This is also a lav on this matter. Gimel, another example, as kol hadavar shanechi mitzavagay metishmuru lasais, everything in this parsha you should keep and do. Litem loisese al ese ha'amurim beparsha. It's adding a loisese on all the mitzvahs say that there is in this parsha. Aber dafke in unser pasuk is Rashi meirich b'lishaynai. Rashi adds a few words and says, Ba kosov litem loisese al hadavar. The Torah's intention here, it's coming to tell you a loisese on this matter. Why is Rashi adding those words, ba hakosov? So the explanation for this can be said, and it's simply as follows. In the andere Erter, drei Erter, and the other three places that we just quoted, is the pasuk nit oisem belois to meisav zane loisasa. The Torah that writes the lav is not coming only to add the lav to what we know already before. As an efaram noch chidushim in the psukim. There are additional novel points that are mentioned here in the pasuk. Aleph, regarding the first pasuk, pasuk is speaking about not bringing a carbon outside the Beis HaMikdash, and it adds the words asher tire, which teaches, as Rashi says, asher yala belipcha, if it's going to be your heart's desire to bring outside the Beis HaMikdash a carbon. Avol atamakrev al pinavi chulo. Rashi, but that teaches that if it's a navi, a prophet, that says to bring the carbon, then it's allowed. Beis in the second pasuk quoted, Yisham locha pentaza v'salevi kol yamecha. It says alad moscha, on your land in Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi explains, Ava bagoyla encha muzar olav yoser mi'aniyeh Yisrael. In exile, you are not warned to take care of the Levi more than other poor individuals amongst Yidden. Pirish Rashi. So the pasuk is also adding an additional point here. Gimel, and in the third pasuk, as kol hadavar goy mitishmuru lasais leisaisif olav v'leisigra mimeno. The pasuk here is adding the leisesa of not to add to Torah or not to decrease from the mitzvahs of the Torah, bal seitzev and bal teisef and bal tigra. So as we see in these three psukim, yet the Torah is coming to add a lav, but it's also adding certain details when it says this lav. Mashenken in unser pasuk leisucha lechol b'sharecha goymer is ba kosov liten loisesa ala davar. In our case, though, the pasuk here is coming for this purpose alone, to add a loisesa on this matter. The pasuk kommt menit mitzumaysev zayin a loisesa. Just this, it's coming to add a loisesa after we already know the mitzvah say. This needs to be explained. Why is it relevant for Rashi to highlight this point? As the ganze kavana from pasuk is litin loisesa, that bar kosov, that the whole point of the pasuk is just this, to add the loisesa. So from Rashi's emphasis, you could see that there's something more here, and it's logical to say, as da muzmen haben dem loisese. That over here we must have this pasuk telling us this loisese. Nit wie in ander Erter, it's not similar to other cases, not if to meisav zayin in chaymer adavar, in einish v'chulu, where the Torah adds a loisese, and the point is to add to the severity of the matter or the punishment that comes along with the lav. Benitten die dan is da spezielle adgoshe in dem befeirischen lav. In our case, though, there is a special emphasis regarding the fact that there is a lav for this, und the far is da of dem a kosev miyuchot, and that's why there's a special pasuk coming and adding this lav. What is unique in our case that it's necessary to add this lav? The Yeshleime der Biren, so the explanation for this is, da retzich wegen meiser v'kotchem chulu. What we're speaking about over here is eating meiser or kotchem. Was achilasam is a mitzvah. To eat this is actually a mitzvah. The Rebbe wollte man gekent meinen, and so if that's the case, one would make the mistake and think in limud al derech hapshat, when you learn the pasuk according to its simple understanding. As das, was es ist da at zivui, zei zu bringen und essen in Yerushalayim, the fact that there's a mitzvah, that the location where it should be eaten is, that you should bring it and eat it in Yerushalayim, is das a mitzvah neisefes. This is an added mitzvah on the original mitzvah, which is to eat the meiser and kotchem. Das heißt, in other words, this would mean, one would think to say that these are two separate mitzvahs, and therefore they're not dependent one on another. Aleph, the first is achilas meiser v'kotchem chulu. There's a mitzvah to eat the meiser and the kotchem. Beis, and then there's another point. Achilasam b'Yerushalayim b'makom yivchar Hashem. Then there's the location that it should be eaten in Yerushalayim, the place that Hashem chooses. Now, what would this mean? Ulechein, when einer is an einis kennet essen sein meiser oder kotchem chulu in Yerushalayim, when it's a case where it's out of the person's control and he cannot eat the meiser or kotchem in Yerushalayim, there'd be room to say as er can. So then he may. Not only he may, but he also must. You should eat the meiser and kotchem wherever he is in his city. So mekayim zayin al kapanim the mitzvah from achilas meiser v'kotchem chulu. Fulfill the mitzvah of eating the meiser or the kotchem, which is a separate mitzvah wherever he is. That's what one would think. For this, the Torah comes to clarify and gives a lav on this matter. As achila b'Yerushalayim is nit a mitzvah noisefes. Eating the meiser and kotchem, specifically in Yerushalayim, is not an added mitzvah besides the fact that one should eat it. Now, says that's tnai le'yikuva. This is a condition which is a must. It may not be eaten anywhere else. That's what the pasuk here is coming to say. Yes, it's a mitzvah to eat, but it must be done only here in Yerushalayim. Das is the hemshich in Pirush Rashi. Now, based on this, we'll understand what Rashi says when he continues explaining the term of leisucha, that you're unable, that it means that you're not allowed. Then wie as mefarish as the kavana klolus from them pasuk is. After Rashi explains what's the general intention of this pasuk. Ba kasav litin loises ala davar. The pasuk is coming to say that there's a lav, that this is a must, that has to be eaten only in Yerushalayim, is in mefarish di verte leisucha. So now Rashi translates the two words of leisucha, that you're unable. The yachalata aval ein charashai, that you are able but you're not allowed. What's Rashi adding here? After we know that the point of this pasuk is to add this lav regarding this matter, it's now understood why here regarding this iser, the Torah uses this term of leisucha, that you're unable. The explanation is, when Rashi says that you are able, meint Rashi, what Rashi really means with this is, Rashi is not speaking about the physical fact that you're able to eat it outside Yerushalayim. What's the chiddush of this? As the Rebbe pointed out in the beginning of the Sikha, that Rashi doesn't usually begin and explain and say what his problem is and then give his pshat. So Rashi here says, Yachalato. Rashi is not coming to speak about the fact physically. Now the mitzvah yachayles to essen b'Yerushalayim. Rather, Rashi is speaking about the possibility, because of the mitzvah that you have, to eat it in all of your cities. Mitzat Svar Hanal, from the mitzvah, from Achilas Maisa v'Kachim Chula Kanal. Because of the point mentioned before, that when you read the psukim, it would seem that you should have the possibility and the mitzvah to eat this kachim or meiser wherever you are, in a case when you can't make it to Yerushalayim. One of them is the pasuk v'chadish, and therefore the pasuk here comes and adds and tells you the point that no, lo yisuchal en charashoy. You're not able, which means you're not allowed. The azhara is shaylol the mitzvah yechayles. What the pasuk here is coming to say is that it's coming to change our understanding of what the obligation of this mitzvah is. That yes, you would think on one hand that there is a mitzvah, so therefore you should eat it wherever it is. If it's not possible to come, says the pasuk, no, lo yisuchal. That's not what that mitzvah is. You're not able to eat it in other places because you're not allowed. The mitzvah is not outside Yerushalayim. Das heißt, mit dem lav is the pasuk mechadish. Here with this lav, the pasuk is not only adding another lav because of severity, but the pasuk here is saying a new point. As chutz Yerushalayim is nitadi mitzvah von achilas ma'aseh v'kachim chulu. It changes our understanding of this mitzvah, that now we know that no, you don't have that possibility. You don't have that mitzvah to eat it outside Yerushalayim, and it has to be eaten only in Yerushalayim. Therefore, the Torah uses this term of leisuchal. It's not just coming to say the prohibition itself, but it's coming to clarify the understanding of how this mitzvah is fulfilled. And it's saying, no, that's not how you fulfill the mitzvah. You can't do it that way. It must be done this way because outside Yerushalayim you don't have this mitzvah. With this we understand why Rashi brings the example for this, specifically here from the pasuk in Nevi'im, by the story of the Yevusim that occupied Yerushalayim. Because it's only there that it's exactly like we have this point here in our pasuk. Because to kaivish zayin Yevusi Yeshve Yerushalayim, the Yidden then to come and conquer the Yevusim which were occupying Yerushalayim is l'chayre do'at tzivui. There's a command that you didn't have for this. The Yidden should come and should expel the Goyim that are living in Eretz Yisrael, and they should inherit the land. Ubemele is the Yechaylim Hayu. When Rashi here says that Yidden are able to conquer the city, nit no mitzad dem Gashmi is the Gevure von Yidden. It's not only talking about the physical might of Yidden that they're able to conquer the land. It means the ability that they have in the fulfillment of the mitzvah. And this is what the Torah comes and clarifies and says, that because of the oath, they could not expel them. That you're not allowed. What this means is, as they're lo yachlo, when it says here that you're unable, you're not allowed, is mitzad shvuah, because of the oath that there is, that sivui from kibush haaretz is melachatchila nitchal b'negei yevusi. The mitzvah to conquer the land does not take effect regarding this place where the yevusim are. Al derech nidin didan. This is exactly like over here in our case regarding the mitzvah of eating the meiser and kachim. When the pasuk says that you may not eat it in your cities, that clarifies for us as bisharecha is nitadi mitzvah that there is no mitzvah to eat meiser and kachim outside of Yerushalayim. So here as well, we're dealing with a mitzvah to conquer Eretz Yisrael, but because of the oath, the pasuk says leisuchal. Here, the mitzvah does not apply. But here, Rashi has to explain more details about this example that he's bringing. Because it's not at all understood. How can it be said as mitzad dem shvuah to the bnei ches soll nicht chal sein zivi Hashem zu einem in ganz Eretz Yisrael, because of the shvuah that was made with the children of ches. So now the command, the mitzvah of Hashem, should not take effect to conquer the entire land, the entire Eretz Yisrael. Adarabah, the opposite should be true. That tzivui Hashem la'achri matan Torah, the mitzvah after matan Torah, darf doch mevatel sein. Die ischayvus shemitzad hashvuah lifnei zeh. This should be strong enough to nullify the mitzvah, or the obligation, that is, not mitzvah. It should nullify the obligation that they had because of the oath from before. The mitzvah is more important, is definitely stronger than this oath, this obligation that they had before. So how can we say that in this case, the mitzvah does not take away this obligation that they have? Is the beer in them? So the explanation for this is, yes, mitzad adin, it's true if you look at it, because of the halacha, the oath that they made has no strength at all, now that we have the mitzvah of Hashem to conquer the entire Eretz Yisrael. Von deswegen, nevertheless, wie bald as lefi dasa Yevusim, hat die Shvua yagat atayke, but because in the perception of the Yevusim, this oath still does have a strength, is oib Yidden, wollten sich nicht gerechnet mit der Shvua, so if Yidden would not consider at all this oath anymore, wollte gekommen achillel Hashem. It would be desecrating Hashem's name. And that's what the pasuk here is saying, that Yidden cannot expel them, that they're not allowed. Because of the fact that it would desecrate Hashem's name, the Yidden have to behave in such a manner as if this shvua is still in effect and the mitzvah does not apply here. Al derech, and an example for this, we find what the Gemara says. As we find by the Gevainim that came and converted when Yidden came to conquer Eretz Yisrael, they didn't really convert sincerely. They came and fooled the Yidden. They made a covenant with them, and they swore to them that they'll allow them to live peacefully. They can't touch them or bother them. Now, the Gemara explains, even though really this oath should not take effect at all, because they came and tricked the Yidden. They weren't sincere. From deswegen, the Yidden did not kill them and wipe them out together with the other nations in the land because of to sanctify Hashem's name. In the perception of the Gevainim, they thought that this was coming to them. So, based on this, we can understand was Rashi is mefarish as the shvua is nit the shvuas Avraham Avimelech. Rashi here does not say that the oath we're talking about is between Avraham and Avimelech, nor the krisis bris keshalokach mem ma'aras hamachpelah. Rather, we're talking about a different covenant, never mentioned in the pasuk clearly, that there was between Avraham and the Chittim when he bought ma'aras hamachpelah. Weil das ist noch mehr Magdel dem Chil Hashem shebedavar, wenn Yidden wollten sich nicht gefiert al pi di shvua. Because only this explains to a greater extent why this desecrates the name of Hashem if Yidden would not follow along with this oath. Loit and krisis bris mit the Bnei Cheis, according to this covenant that was made with the Bnei Cheis, is the heder akibush von Yerushalayim v'yatnai in Kenya for Maras HaMachpelah. Since this was made in connection with Avram acquiring Maras HaMachpelah, so this is made like a condition in that acquisition. Kommt as wenn es wollt nicht abgeht geworden die Schwur. So if that's the case, if they would not be keeping this oath, wollt ledachsa Yevusim bot geworden lemafreya kinyan shel Avram b'ma'aras hamachpelah. So then in the Yevusim's perception, that would mean that the entire sale of Ma'aras hamachpelah would retroactively be null and void. Ubemela, as the obvious imois zene geven kfurim bekever leilahem. It would be coming out that in their perception that our ancestors are buried in a burial spot that doesn't belong to them. So in order to spare us from this level of a Chil Hashem, as the Yevusim will sagen, as Yidden atnet, as the obvious v'mois and kfurim bekever leilahem, that Yidden don't care about the fact that their ancestors are buried in a burial spot that's not theirs, is lo yachlu lahirisham. They could not, and which means they may not, expel the Yevusim from Yerushalayim. So therefore Rashi specifically brings this covenant that it says in Pikad Rabbi Lezer to explain what really is the Chil Hashem in this case. Rashi can sich aber nicht mistapik sein mit dem allein. However, Rashi doesn't stop at this. Because the child learning the pasuk has another question here. Wie bald das mitzat Chil Hashem haben Yidden nicht getort einnehmen ihrer Yevusi, since because of this, because of desecrating Hashem's name, Yidden cannot conquer this city, is wie up in the Sof from Zay zugenommen. So how is it that we know? Every child knows that the city of Yerushalayim was conquered if they did not want to desecrate Hashem's name. The farm was Rashi Misayim Zayin, therefore Rashi must conclude and add that this is what the pasuk says, that David HaMelech had them remove the statues that had this oath written on it. David HaMelech hat zugenommen die Tzlamim, auf welcher es ist geschrieben geworden, die Schwur. David HaMelech removed all these statues that had this Schwur. Also ist batte geworden, dem Zikarim von dem Schwur. And therefore through this, the memory of this oath that was made many years before was nullified. Ukamovim bepashtus, as it's simply understood as nachdem, wie es schon nadurch be'erech 800 Jahre from the krisis bris mit the Bnei Cheis, after it passed about 800 years from the time of this covenant, hat man gering gekannt Battle machen dem Zikarim von der Schwur durch Meister sein die Tzlamim shekosvalem Shvua. So it's easy to nullify the memory of this oath by removing the statues that had it written on it. Und das ist der Diok ki im hisircha ha'ivrim va'pischim tzlamim shekosvalem Shvua. This is why the pasuk here specifically says that you remove these statues that are blind and are lame, that it had the shvur written on it. Dort sich nicht gefordert zu meise sein the shvur atzma. It wasn't necessary to remove the memory of the actual oath itself. The shvur is belavachi batel takfa, is husar. Really the oath was already gone, it was nullified on its own, as explained before. Man darf nur meise sein die tzlamim. What has to be removed is the statues that had this oath written on it. Only in order to remove any desecration of Hashem's name that will be connected to this. Therefore, Rashi quotes this to explain how it is that the Yidden conquered the land, because they were really allowed. It was just an issue of Chilul Hashem, so therefore David HaMelech had them remove any memory of this covenant, and therefore, once it's not remembered, they can conquer Yerushalayim. Sof is a befartnet glatik. However, even after all of this, there's still something that's not fully smooth understood in this inyan. Die bald, as es dann gewähnt, lebendige Yevusim, welch haben je gewusst von dem Schwur. At that time, there still were living Yevusim that knew about this oath. Und haben gesagt, and they told this to David HaMelech, Leisavei heina kiyim esircha gaime, do not come here unless you remove so on. Is klape zei, was hat sie aufgetan, die Asaras ha'ivrim va'pischim. So for them, what did it help to remove the oath that was written on the statues? The far is Rashi mitzayin, so Pirkei de Rabbi Lazar. Kach mefurish bePirkei de Rabbi Lazar. Therefore, Rashi does something which is not usual, and he tells us from where he took his pshat from. Take a look at what it says in Pirkei de Rabbi Lazar. In Pirkei de Rabbi Lazar, nachdem wir es wert erzählt wegen Shvuas Avram v'cholo, there, after it tells us about this covenant that Avram made, or this oath, steht dort v'achakach Kono David es ira Yevusi li Yisrael b'ksav oilam la'achuzas oilam sheish meis shkolim chulu. That David HaMelech bought the city of Yevusi, the city of Yerushalayim, for the Yidden, with written, documented forever as an inheritance, and he paid 600 coins for this. Und wie bald David hat keine gewinnt, ira Yevusi b'kesef male. So since David bought this, he bought it for full price, hat es in ganzen Vatel gewinnt, welle es is Taine von dem Yevusi auf Yerushalayim. So therefore this got rid of any argument, any claim that there would be over the city of Yerushalayim. So it's necessary to take a look at the end of the story in Pirkei de Rabbi Lazar to see what the inyan is. Pikola now, based on all of this, Yesh Levayer, for was Rashi bringt, why Rashi quotes over the name of the one that said this, and that's Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. Talmud Memulach. Can doch fragen, a sharper student may still ask, wie bald a Yid hat die mitzvah von Achilles Maisa v'kotchem chulu. Since a Yid does have the mitzvah to eat, and to eat the Maisa and the kotchem. Wie wird der Masbe sein sich, how does he explain himself? Was is anaynis, onus, that he's a person in a situation where it's out of his control, und kann it gang kan Yerushalayim, he can't go up and bring his Maisa and kotchem to Yerushalayim, und der Fahr loisucha lecha lafilu b'sharecha. So now he can't do the mitzvah. And even here in the gates, if he's the onus, so shouldn't he be given the permission to fulfill the mitzvah here? Sagt Rashi, as der Maime hat gesagt, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. Therefore Rashi tells us the one that said this is Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. From the Bavusta Maimor, from Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is, the Maime, one of the famous sayings that Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says, is the statement that it says in the Mishnah in Brachos, Lama Kodma Parsha Shema Levahayim Shemaya. Why is the parsha of Shema before the parsha of V'hayim Shemaya Kadeshi Kabel Olav Oil Malchus Shemayim Tchila V'achakach Mekabel Olav Oil Mitzvahs? In order for one to first accept upon himself the yoke of heaven, that Hashem is his king, and then you can properly accept the yoke of all the individual mitzvahs. Und das is the Asbara Binyaneinu, and therefore this is what one has to explain to himself, in this case, even when it's out of his control, to come to Yerushalayim. Eider Ayid hat a Kabbalah Sel mitzvahs, before the Yid accepts the individual mitzvahs, darf him free sein Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shemayim. Der oil from Melech Malach HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he first has to accept the kingdom from Hashem, the yoke of Hashem from the King of Heaven. Was hat angesagt, and he commanded and said, Leisuchal lechel b'sharecha goimer, that you do not eat in any of your gates, Kiyim lifnei Hashem alekecha techlenu. It should only be eaten in front of Hashem. B'makom asher yivcha Hashem alekecha by. That's the mitzvah, based on the way Hashem designs it, that it should be eaten only in the place that Hashem chooses in it.